50 field offices in the state of North Carolina today. They have 3 offices in Wake County alone, which is Raleigh, the state capital. Last time in 2004, they only had 1 field office in Raleigh. They are flooding the zone in Virginia. See, they know. And it doesn't matter what the Gallup is from day to day. Just trust me, just ignore the polls. Because they're going to be up, they're going to be down. In the end, this election is going to be extremely close. I don't know that we're going to know on election night. That's how close I think this election is going to be. And we're really at a crossroads, folks. Because, you know, it's become a cliche, but a true one. Because in any vibrant democracy that is consistently renewing itself, every election is the most important election of our lifetimes. Because we're determining the course of a free nation made up of free men and women. But in this particular case, other than 1980, I can't think of a time in my life where I really believed an election would decide the direction of the nation and the planet for a generation. This election, we are going to decide whether, on the one hand, we're going to have a rebirth of the founding principles upon which this nation was built, of liberty and freedom and hard work and faith in God and individual initiative and self-reliance, or whether or not we're going to go down the road of European-style socialism, of state-owned and operated industries, of the government usurping every single area of our lives, economic, religious, personal, financial, our health, all of the above, until ultimately, through a combination of runaway spending, unmanageable debt, dragging down our economy, we will end up where Portugal, Spain, and Greece are. And that's not what I believe God would desire for our country. Because we've been given a birthright that other people all over the world hunger for and have crossed oceans and have crawled on their hands and knees across borders to come to. And that idea that they were hungering for was the right to rise as high and as far as their talents could carry them, with the blessing of God, free from any kind of a caste system or a class system that would hold you back, as even to this day it does in countries like Great Britain, where you can't get into certain schools unless you came from a particular family. That's not the way America was built. And if we lose that ideal, if we lose the idea, as the founders said in the Declaration, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the founders went on in that document to assert something that was the most radical idea that has ever been introduced to the human race. And that was that if at any point subsequent to establishing the government, the sole purpose of which was to protect those God-given rights. That's the purpose of government, is to ensure and protect those rights against any threat, foreign or domestic. If at any point the Declaration says the government failed to protect those rights, or it begins to infringe upon those clear God-given rights, then it is not just the right, it is the duty and obligation of the free people so assembled to overthrow that government and start over with a new one. Anybody here from some left-wing blog or website, and you're going to put the grainy video up, I'm just quoting the Declaration of Independence. Okay, that's what they said. And when you think about what's happened in just 3 short years under this administration, taking over the automobile companies, And by the way, now claiming what a great success that was. While they basically, vitiated the rights of bondholders, who had loaned the companies money. They gave 40% of General Motors to the United Auto Workers Union in basically a crony capitalist payoff. And, this was an industry that was the envy and marvel of the modern world. The automobile was invented and perfected here. The rest of the world imitated us. And now it's basically a subsidiary of the government. And this administration has put a gun to the head of General Motors and made him spend $3 billion on the Chevy Volt. And I think they've produced it. I don't want to offend anybody who's a Chevy Volt driver, but I think for $3 billion they've produced 2,000 of them. They've got another electric car company, I think it's Fisker, that is going to be making the car in Sweden. So they've given Fisker $500 million in loan guarantees. They were supposed to have produced 11,000 electric cars by the end of 2011. They haven't produced one. This is what happens when the federal government tries to run things. They took over AIG, the largest insurance company in the world, gave them $80 billion. They took over the mortgage industry, which is basically a $5 trillion total portfolio. The cost of bailing out Fannie and Freddie sits today at $144 billion and counting. And that was just his first 60 days in office. If you go on the internet, either Bing or Google, and you Google Hugo Chavez Obama, what comes up is a meeting between Chavez and Castro, in which Castro gets up and says, I would have never thought to nationalize the automobile company. Comrade Obama has done far more than we would have ever thought to do. This is a Reuters story. Look it up. This is how radical and out of the mainstream this president is. And then there's Obamacare. And Sid was talking earlier about this latest mandate. I think that this was a game changer in the 2012 election. And I'll tell you why. Not only because it showed how tone deaf, not only how utterly insensitive to the religious and moral sensibilities of the American people, not only outright hostility to the rights of religious institutions to propagate their faith and to share their faith and practice their faith free from government regulation and harassment. And by the way, keep in mind that 1 out of every 6 patients in a hospital bed tonight is in a Catholic hospital. Okay? 1 out of every 10 Americans below the poverty level in America is a client of Catholic Charities USA. If you look, and I'm sure this is true of the Miami Archdiocese and probably many others, if you look at just the Baltimore, Maryland Archdiocese, they are training, educating, feeding, and touching over 300,000 people a year. And they have over 160,000 people below the poverty level in the greater Baltimore area that they're either housing or clothing or feeding or educating. Folks, the social safety net in America is a faith-based safety net. It is not ultimately a government safety net. That's just the reality. And by the way, 90% of the homeless shelters in America are operated by either a church or a synagogue or a religious ministry. So this is a dagger aimed at the heart of religious expression in America. It is going to tear asunder the fabric of our safety net. But in addition to that, and this, in my opinion, is the ultimate key, it really pulls back the curtain on what Obamacare will look like when fully implemented in 2014 in a second Obama administration. Does anybody believe for 1 minute, if this guy didn't have to face the voters again, that they would have walked out some compromise? Oh no. This was fully debated within the administration. And Vice President Biden and Bill Daley, the outgoing White House Chief of Staff, they have leaked like a sieve to the New York Times and everybody else. We were against this. He knew exactly what he was doing. And I will tell you, I support, and we at Faith and Freedom Coalition are making one of our top priorities passing Senator Rubio's legislation to repeal this mandate against religious institutions, ministries, hospitals, and educational institutions. They should be allowed to practice their faith in God free from any interference from the Obama administration or anybody else. After we beat Bill Nelson here in Florida, after George Allen replaces Tim Kaine in Virginia, and after Danny Rayburg beats John Tester, and we win the Senate back, let me tell you what's going to happen. When the new Congress comes back on January 5th of next year, H.R. 1 in the House will be the repeal of Obamacare. That's already passed the House. It's already passed the House. All right? A Republican Senate will also pass the repeal legislation. Don't believe all this nonsense from the media that you have to have 60 votes. Not true. Remember, because Scott Brown won the special election in Massachusetts in January of 2010, taking the seat previously held by Ted Kennedy, the Democrats dropped down to 59 in the Senate. So the only way to pass Obamacare in the Senate was under so-called budget reconciliation rules, which requires only 51 votes. So they passed it with only 51 votes. It was more than that, but that was all they had to have. They passed it under budget reconciliation rules, which means in early January next year, we will repeal it under the same rules. Yeah. We'll be able to repeal it for 50 million bucks. And on January 20th, when the new president walks off the west front of the Capitol after taking the oath of office, he will walk into an anteroom in the Capitol, and he will take a pen off a desk, and the first thing he will do as president is sign the repeal of Obamacare and leave it on the ash heap of history where it belongs. Yeah. I've probably gone on too long as it is, and I want to allow some time for Q&A. So let me just tell you how we're going to win this election. It's going to be very simple. It's not going to be easy. I promise you this is going to be the hardest job you've ever loved. You're going to work harder than you've ever worked to win this election. Because this is an administration that can't run on its record. How do you run on a record of more people living in poverty than at any time in American history? Okay? 13 million people out of work. And by the way, I don't know if anybody heard Sean Hannity this afternoon. I assume you listened to it on WIOD, but WJNO up here. But he was pointing out that the Gallup organization that polls every night, I mean, the Gallup organization is the most sophisticated public opinion survey organization in the world. And what they do is, rather than doing all this, monkey business like they do at the Labor Department under this administration, is they just poll people and ask them if they have a job. And under the Gallup survey, the unemployment rate is still 9%. And it would be 9% today, but for the 3 million people that they have backed out of the workforce. Do you know that in January, when supposedly unemployment dropped to 8.3%, do you know in that month alone, this administration claims that 1.1 million people left the workforce? If you believe that, I've got a bridge to nowhere I want to sell you. Okay? So they can't run on their record 13 million unemployed, 47 million people on food stamps. Half of all the people without a job in America today have been without a job for 6 months or more. That is the highest percentage of persistent long-term unemployment since the Great Depression. Now that's his economic record. Let's look at his fiscal record. He's going to double the national debt in just one term. He's going to be the first president in U.S. history to have trillion-dollar deficits every single year he was in office. And this most recent budget, which is, really, I guess it was one Democratic congressman who called it a nervous breakdown on paper. This was a Democrat. He claims he's going to reduce the debt by $4 trillion over the next 10 years. $900 billion of that are savings he is claiming by not fighting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the assumption of the Department of Office and Management of Budget was there are these two wars going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, and if they went on for 10 years, it would cost $1 trillion. Wave a magic wand. We're not going to do that anymore. That was one of the 4 trillion. The 2 of the 4 trillion was the money they claimed they were going to save by not extending the Bush tax cuts. Well, the fact of the matter is, under current law, the Bush tax cuts expire on January 1, 2013. Number 2, he has never proposed repealing or allowing to expire all the Bush tax cuts, only those for the wealthiest Americans, and only the income tax rate from 36 to 39 or 35 to 39. The marriage penalty, the child tax credit, just about all the other tax cuts, he says he wants to keep. So 3 of the 4 children is a total lie, total smoke and mirrors. So he can't run on his fiscal record. He can't run on his economic record. Let's look at his foreign policy record. How are we doing overseas? Remember when he went to Cairo in 2009 and gave a speech in which he apologized for the United States' projection of its military, diplomatic, and economic power in the Middle East? Remember when he got up and basically compared what he called the Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands to the Holocaust? Remember when he did the YouTube video for the, I guess it was the Muslim New Year, and basically issued a personal greeting to the Iranian people? That's really worked out, hasn't it? You know, you've now got Syria mowing people down in the streets, and this administration is unable to even get a resolution condemning it out of the UN Security Council. Egypt, which this administration praised, has now been taken over by the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a terrorist organization. Iran's funded and manipulated proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, are respectively firing missiles into Israel and dominating Lebanon, and now blowing up or attempting to blow up Israeli diplomats all over the world. And Iran is now probably, unless this nation or Israel acts militarily, is going to be a nuclear power before the end of this year. So if you can't run on your economic record, you can't run on your foreign policy record, there's only one kind of campaign to run. And that is a scorched earth, negative, tear down the Republican nominee campaign. And that's all this is going to be. Make no mistake about it. I don't care if it's Newt or Santorum or Romney. They are already, they've already got those ads in the can, and they're coming with a knife and an allen. That's what this fight is going to be like. And let me just tell you something. Don't underestimate Obama and don't underestimate his team. There is nothing they will not do to win an election, and there is no way a guy who moved to the south side of Chicago via a wealthy prep school in Hawaii and Harvard Law School and showed up and didn't know a soul. All right, my mother grew up in Chicago, okay? I know a little bit about Chicago politics. And within 10 years, he had climbed the craggy rock of the Daley Machine, was in the United States Senate, and then took on the Clinton machine and beat him like a drum. This guy is as tough and as mean and as cynical as any politician you'll ever see. There's nothing he's not willing to do. And if you don't believe me, just look what he did this week on the super PACs. He had the Supreme Court sitting right in front of him at the State of the Union address a year ago, and he said this decision is a threat to democracy and will allow foreign corporations and special interests to dominate our politics. A year later, sign me up. Where do I get involved in this? All right? So let me tell you how we're going to win. Don't be intimidated by it, but know your enemy. Okay? Number one, we're going to run on a message that is not just anti-Obama, but it is a forward-leaning, conservative reform agenda that will jumpstart this economy, unleash the entrepreneurial energy of the American people, open up the floodgates of opportunity like we haven't seen since the Reagan era, and put tens of millions of people back to work. That's what we have to do. We have to just not say what we're against. We have to say what we're for. And we have to have a plan that will delimit government, increase liberty, ensure that we win the war on terrorism, and that we provide the right incentives for people to once again risk not just capital, but their lives and their families, because that's what really small businessmen and women do. I mean, 85% of the jobs are created by employees with 250 or fewer employees. It's really the small businessmen and women. And if you look at the churn of a dynamic market economy, do you know that every year in America, 20 million jobs disappear? 20 million. 20 million jobs disappear because various things happen. I mean, look at what's happening to BlackBerry right now. I mean, they basically invented the smartphone. And they have fallen so far behind the innovation of people like Apple that an entire industry is changing so fast that if you blink, you miss it. That's what happens in a dynamic economy. So you can't have people wondering, well, gosh, if I hire an employee, what is the fine going to be from Obamacare if I don't give the right set of benefits to my employees? What's the tax rate going to be? Nobody knows. Once we lay down rules of the road, and once we make it clear that America's best days are ahead and not behind of it, I promise you there is no stronger group of people and there is no stronger economy in the world than the U.S. economy. When we have a nominee, and I like you, I'm looking forward to this fighting, getting over, but it's kind of like what Winston Churchill said. The worst form of government, ever conceived, other than all the rest, is democracy. And democracy can sometimes be a little ugly, but you'd rather have this competition. I believe the ultimate nominee, no matter who it is going to be a better candidate, a tougher candidate, and a more disciplined and effective candidate in the fall because of the competition that they're going through right now. So we have to have a strong, positive, reform-oriented, conservative message that makes it clear how our agenda is going to help people's lives get better. The second thing we have to do is we have to have the strongest grassroots organization we have ever had, both inside the party and allied organizations like Faith and Freedom, Americans for Prosperity, and so many others. Now, we frankly got taken to the cleaners by the Obama campaign in 2008. I mean, it was candidly, in some places, it was embarrassing. My home state of Georgia, which George W. Bush carried by 16 points, Obama added in 2008 442,000 net Democratic votes to the 04 baseline. 442,000. Okay? We were basically running the Indy 500, in a late model Buick. And between what they did online, what the labor unions did, what they did in terms of voter registration, voter mobilization, when you went to go hear Obama speak at, I guess at that time it was called Invesco Field in Denver. They now refer to it as Tim Tebow Stadium. We have some Gators here. Well, I'm a Bulldog, but I'm the son of Gators. So my parents are both Gators. So Georgia-Florida weekend at our house is very interesting because my parents are Gators and their 3 children are Bulldogs. So, somebody wins. But lately it's been the Gators. But in any event, that night, 80,000 people filed into that stadium to hear Barack Obama formally accept the Democratic nomination for president. And it was free of charge. You had to have a ticket, but there was no charge. But before you could get in, you had to write down your name, your zip code, and your cell phone number. They got 80,000 cell phone numbers in one night at one event. During that campaign, Barack Obama had 13 million unique emails and 14 million unique cell phone numbers. I knew we were going to lose when I was, wherever I was, somewhere. I flew back to Atlanta. I don't know if you've ever flown through the Atlanta airport, but you have, maybe a few of you, you have those subways that run on the ground, the trains that take you from different concourses. And I'm riding the train to baggage claim. And this guy is standing next to me, and he turns to the guy next to him and he goes, "Hey," he goes, "I just got a text from the Obama campaign asking me for a contribution. Watch this." He scrolled down, he hit $20, held it up. Look at that. I knew right then. Okay, so what we have to do is what you're talking about doing here tonight. Every precinct has to have a precinct chairman. We have to get every single early and absentee voter identified. We got to get those votes banked. We have to knock on every door. We have to call everybody. Sid was mentioning when I was chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, that was how we did it. We got outspent 7-1. We ran a guy who was a former Democrat named Sonny Perdue for governor against an incumbent Democrat who spent $21 million to R3. The Democrat went on the air in April and never went dark. Imagine that. 1,000 gross rating points, which means the average person saw that ad 10 times a week for 8 months. And so we said, look, there's no way we're going to be able to compete with media. There's no way we're going to be able to compete with money. So we trained 5,000 people. Sonny Perdue had his own airplane. He was a pilot. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was one that could get him around. And he flew around and did grassroots events, and our 5,000 volunteers knocked on 250,000 doors in the weekend prior to the election. The final published poll on the Sunday before the Tuesday showed, it was a Zogby poll, showed that Sonny Perdue was going to lose by 13 points. He won by 8. They were only off by 21 points. Now, let me tell you why that happens. It happens because all a pollster does is guess who's going to go to the polls. They create a hypothetical turnout model based on what? Based on who came out, usually in the last 2 elections. So when they do polling in Florida, they're going to be hypothesizing that the same electorate that turned out in 2008 will turn out again. Well, if you do your job and we do our job, the electorate on Election Day 2012 is going to be dramatically different than it was on Election Day 2008. I don't agree with Howard Dean on much, but when he ran for president and he said, "You have the power," he was right. The media doesn't have the power. The pollsters don't have the power. The pundits don't have the power. You have it if you're willing to exercise it. But you're going to have to make sure, and I'm not going to have time tonight to go into this, but at the Faith and Freedom Coalition, we're identifying from micro-targeting data, consumer databases, church directories, and other things, people who share our beliefs and values who are not registered to vote in Florida. Right now, between voters who fit a socially conservative profile and a Tea Party profile, those 2 profiles, there are 650,000 citizens in the state of Florida who share our fiscal and social values who are not registered to vote. 650,000. This is in a state that Obama won by 236,000. So let's build that grassroots organization, register them to vote, get them turned out. Finally and thirdly, we need messengers, not just the presidential nominee, but all the way down the ballot, who can go to voters who haven't always felt welcome in our ranks before and let them know that the welcome mat has been laid out. I think Jeb Bush did a very good job of that when he was running 3 times statewide. Marco Rubio clearly is a star who has that ability. We need more young people. We need more African Americans. We need more Latinos. We need more women who will run for office so that when those voters who haven't always felt welcome in our ranks look at our movement and look at this party, they know that they're welcome. And not just so that the candidates are more reflecting the full diversity of America, but also that our message is an uplifting message that celebrates what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature and doesn't just condemn and criticize those who may not always agree with us. I'll close and then take a few questions by, if I have time, by quoting a man who I believe was the best friend this country ever had, Winston Churchill. You may remember that his mother was an American, and Churchill loved this country. He truly believed that freedom, not just here, not just in Great Britain, but around the world, would not be possible without the beacon that was America. And he once said, "The American people always do the right thing after they have exhausted every other possibility." And over not just the last 3 years of this failed administration, but over probably 30 or 40 years, we've tried everything else. We've tried big government. We've tried, if it feels good, do it. We've tried a lot of things that don't work. It's time for America to come home. It's time for America to do what works again. This is our moment. This is our time. Thank you all very much. God bless you.